Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. Today we have both Scott Hanselman and Mark Downie on. So I am John Galloway. I'm a PM on the .NET community team. And Scott lot of people know who you are, but for newcomers, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Scott Hanselman, and I manage .NET Community. And if I seem a little off right now, I'm post-surgery, and I'm about 80%. I've got like a background process in my CPU, you know what I mean? Like I have a mental task manager right now, and it's like 20% is like my arm is numb. So I'm just kind of waiting for this to wake up. So if I feel off, I apologize ahead of time.
Well, a 20% slower, Scott, I can maybe keep up with you today. We'll see. And Mark, nice to have you on.
Thank you very much. Hi, yeah, I'm Mark Downie. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio side of things. I'm kind of vested in the production diagnostic space.
Awesome. So, and today we'll be talking about how you updated Hanselman Blog, so Scott, your blog and also Hanselman's website as well to .NET 5, right?
Yeah, it's been an ongoing, gosh, we've been thinking about this for what, a year now, 18 months?
Yeah, at least.
Like, this is all spare time stuff, right? I mean, I have a blog, Mark has a blog.
Yeah,
and it's been around forever, but you don't just convert it to .NET Core, move it into a container, into Linux, move it into the cloud, not break any URLs in a weekend. So he and I do it in fits and starts where I'm on the West Coast, he's on a different time zone, and I'm like, hey, you got an hour? And we kind of go back and forth, and we've been doing this, I think, since last summer.
Yeah. I think, and we'll dig into this in detail, but I think, somebody who's like, oh, it should take just a few minutes to update to .NET 5. And it's like, yeah, but it's all the legacy. It's all the not breaking things. It's all that stuff. So cool. I'm going to jump into our community links. As always, we love community. I'm going to be sharing these links out. Actually, I'll do that now. Throw that into the chat so people can follow along if they'd like. So some good ones. So we called out Rahul, and he's been doing these. He's got a great channel going. So this is, we mentioned him in September. He's continuing to kick out some really good ones. So this one, he's been doing a series on single page applications, and single page applications, like he started with the basics of here's what's in the templates. In this video, he's showing doing the whole build pipeline. So he just published this one earlier in October, and then he's been digging in since then into some things with like HTTP client and, working on client calls and stuff. But with this one, the code's out on GitHub. And so the specifics here, he goes through creating a single page application with React, sets up the build pipeline. So here you can see in Azure DevOps, configuring the build pipeline, and then doing the full deployment out to Azure. So great stuff. So definitely subscribe to this. He's creating a lot of great content. All right, this one's fun. So this is Blazor Guy's got Blazor Galaga. And this is not just like kind of looks a bit like Galaga, like it is Galaga. It's crazy. So he's using Howler.js for the audio. He's using a Canvas component. And like the whole thing, I mean, I don't know if that's coming through, but that's, it's the game. It's crazy. So it's really cool to see this whole like building out. Like this is, here he's going optimizing for 60 frames per second. This is high performance, like really cool stuff. So need to see that. Speaking of blasting off in rockets and Blazor, we've got Dave Brock, and he's doing a series where he's doing a getting to know Blazor. And the focus of this one, he's using the NASA astronomical picture of the day API. And he's doing his approach to this is, nothing about Blazor. That's fine. I'm going to teach you. So he builds up all the stuff in here. So he talks about, even like, what is it? What are the hosting models and stuff? So very cool. He goes through, talks about making his API calls. He, walks through his function calls and all that. And at the so this is great if you're new to Blazor, if you don't really know anything about it, this is a whole building a non-trivial application. So of course the code's out on GitHub, and definitely a good one to read through. All right, this one's another fun one. This is from monksoul, and this is actually from China. The site is all this content is actually in Chinese. So I'm using the browser translate features. But especially if you are a Chinese speaking viewer, welcome for one thing. And this is a very Chinese friendly, like all the, for instance, if you look at the docs, he's got, again, I've translated this website to English, but he's got all these docs are in Chinese, great information. So the idea of what this FUR framework is, it's a optimized best practice enterprise application framework. So he's building on top of .NET Core or .NET 5. And so this is including, he's got Jenkins integration for build. He's got a CLI. And the whole idea is it's an opinionated framework, and it's built towards, get started quickly. And he's going to kind of guide you towards building an enterprise best practice application. So very cool. All right, Danielle Gomez-Jamarillo talking about .vvm. So we've talked about, and we'll be talking about upgrading, existing ASP.NET from, going back to .NET Framework applications, and some different ways, different approaches to moving on to .NET Core. And one, of course, is Blazor. We've had some good shows on that recently. But another nice one to keep in mind is .vvm. And one nice thing with .vvm is you can run side by side. So you can .vvm will work with ASP.NET on .NET Framework, and then you can kind of do your updates to it, and then you can flip over to .NET Core. So if you need to do a phased migration like that, this is a nice alternative. And it's also built using it's a MVVM style. So as opposed to Blazor being component based, and you can definitely build MVVM on top of that. This is very much you build views and view models. So if that kind of style feels good to you, then that's also nice. So here we're using a Bootstrap 4 template to build out a dashboard. Shows the kind of setup. So here we've got our views, view models, data access layer, etc. And then just some things to point out, again, building out, and this is a relatively straightforward thing with views and view models. There's also master pages. So again, this is kind of feels, ASP.NET on .NET Framework feels the whole kind of easy to update your master pages to a dot master. And then the kind of final end design here, we end up with a style. Let me get to so it translates very much. So here we've got like a grid view text column and grid view. So, and we had Jeff Fritz on recently talking about updating web forms to Blazor components, and that's definitely, an option, but just wanted to point this out, especially for that kind of phase migration is nice. All right, Philip talking about beautiful and compact web APIs with C#9, .NET 5, and ASP.NET Core. So in this one, he talks about taking a pretty straightforward web API and using things like record syntax and top-level programs. So top-level statements here. So even just a simple case of going from this is your simplest before top-level, and now here we've got this is a top-level program there completely, right? So we can kind of get rid of some of the extra noise, especially if you're writing very light, tight APIs. That's a few lines of code that cuts this in a third, right? So he also talks about records, an important feature in C#9. And, you've got this syntax, but you've also got this syntax as well. And an important thing, I saw Jimmy Bogart was, tweeting just over the past few days about updating a sample he did to records. And you can write mutable records, even though records do make it possible to write immutable data structures. And so using this syntax here is going to generate that constructor for you. So then he goes through and just talks about building from a simple ASP.NET Core API. And I'll just kind of jump to the end. He walks through several different kind of steps along the way, looking at things like serialization and authentication. But the kind of end result is this, this right here. So this is a non-trivial API defining, all the routes and everything, and it's 89 lines of code. So, and again, this is you can do it tighter, but this has support for things like deserialization and authorization, and including the entire function. You know, this is your entire app right here. So that's pretty impressive to see that. All right, just a few more. We've got John Hilton. He's talking about integrating Blazor WASM components into your existing Razor Pages applications. So it's, you know, a lot of the things you'll see will be, if you're forced to make a choice right at the beginning. I'm making a Razor Pages app, so I'm going to do this, or I'm making a Blazor app, so I'm going to do this. And what's nice is it's all web technologies and it all integrates together. It takes a little bit of doing, and he walks through a few things, but he talks about you know, integrating it in. It's standard scripts and components. It's some static content. You do need an app div that you need, that it's expecting to inject into. So that's this here. So you need to do that. Another thing is that there is oninitialized is called twice, and we talked through that in a previous blog post that we featured. But just to mention that again, that's actually, I think, something that we ran into with this site, the live.net site, where you can get oninitialized called twice if you're integrating Blazor into existing. That, and here explains why that is. He talks through a few different options, you know, that you can use caches, you can make a service singleton. And then he mentions too that this is kind of an early and a hybrid scenario. And so he does talk through that this is something that it looks like, you know, may continue to evolve. So, but neat to know that you can do that. The final link I've got to share is just .NET Conf. So we've got .NET Conf coming up November 10th through 12th. Looking forward to a lot of cool things getting announced there. And in addition, we're working on these virtual events. So we've currently got 42, the magic number, community events all over the world. So this is working with existing user groups and meetups. And we're helping them to do their own live streamed events starting right after that. So we've got November 10th through 12th is .NET Conf. And then right after that, we've got going all the way through January 31st. And these are, it's really cool to see these pop up just all around the world. People doing in, you know, in different languages. And so if, you know, find one near you, and if you are interested in running one, you can click through. The information's on here to host your own. So you just fill in a form and we give you the stuff. And that's all I got. All right. So how'd you do it? What? So this is your blog, Scott, goes back to, this is the one, like this is your blog.
April of 2002.
Okay. So this is .NET, yes. ASP.NET 1. I mean, this is migrated through all the different .NETs.
So it was originally started by Clemens Vasters, and he worked at a company called Newtelligence. Mark and I may have bumped into some of the Newtelligence namespaces in the thing. And it was written in web forms in ASP.NET 1.1. And then it was open source. I think we did it on SourceForge. And then I registered a DOSBlog domain. I got Omar Shaheen involved, who is now a partner who runs all of OneDrive. I think he's actually a VP now. So, and I'm on the show with you. So Omar and Clemens have gone on to be, you know, famous and powerful. Lots of people used it during the peak of blogging, and then blogging has gotten a little bit more walled garden. People are in Medium and things like that. But I know Mark and I have enjoyed running our blogs and owning our own domains because we want to own our own space. When did you start, Mark?
I started back around about 2005, 2004, when I think it was Live Spaces. What did we have? I say we. I wasn't around.
Windows Live Spaces, yeah.
Right. And so I had started blogging, and then they yanked that, or we yanked that, I guess. The royal we yanked that. And then ultimately I was looking around and saying, well, how do I avoid this ever happening again? Because I started investing in a space that ultimately really wasn't mine. And so I said, then I started looking around for various projects that I could join, or just at least just use. I was just kind of a consumer at that point. And over the years, I've just kind of developed an affinity for DOSBlog. And at the time, I was kind of really interested in learning more about ASP.NET web forms, because that's essentially what I was kind of moving from. I was a VB6 guy for a very long time. And then I started to think about, I assumed ASP.NET Web Forms was the future. This was years ago, obviously.
The thing that was significant about that he mentioned Windows Live Spaces is that Windows Live Spaces was Windows or Microsoft's attempt at being WordPress, being hosted blogs. It was kind of a MySpace hybrid, but it had extraordinarily ugly URLs. If it had one feature, it had nasty URLs. And I think Mark and I share our passion for quality URLs. The URL is UI. Mm-hmm. And DOS Blog at the time had URLs that were Pascal cased. So every single word is capitalized, and then it had a .aspx. It was also incredibly flexible. I think you had dates in your URLs at the time, didn't you, Mark? You had like /year, /month.
Yes, I did for a while.
And then later went to just the title.
Yeah.
So DOS Blog has probably six different kinds of ways you can use a URL. So one of the things that was always in the back of our minds, beyond moving to the cloud, beyond moving to .NET, was making sure that we don't break any URLs. It's really, really important. There's so much stuff in DOS Blog that is focused on not missing an HTTP GET. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's got built-in Google Sitemap support. It's got SEO support. Mark has added social support for Twitter and Reddit and Facebook. We don't want to lose anyone who shows up to the website.
And I think that's there's a whole like 80-20 and it's a lot more than that. Like you can crank out a blog in .NET Core in a few minutes, but doing the migration, and then also like you're saying, doing all those kind of social support and like not missing any of and the fave icon and all that, all those sorts of things. So
this is the thing. I want to just kind of click on that for a second, because yes, making a blog with like public class blog, public class comments for each blog in blogs, that's easy. Making it themable, all the little micro formats. There's micro summary formats and RSS and RSD and WLW comments and Atom. All of these things that really make you fit into a blog ecosystem, that stuff all needs to get done, and DOS Blog does it.
How do you want to go through this? Do you want to talk about the process of updating, or you want to show off some of the code, or?
Well, let me give a little context, and then maybe Mark can talk about it, and then he can share his as well. So bring up my screen here for me, John.
Yep.
So I think Mark, I'd be interested in whether Mark has a similar architecture, but I've actually got 3 sites. So the home screen is a tiny little ASP.NET Core Razor Pages site. And it was the first thing that I updated to .NET Core. It is literally just a homepage. It pulls from the RSS feed. So this is the blog content, but I'm literally calling back to myself and getting an RSS feed here. It's got where I'm speaking, podcasts and books. It's brochureware. It also has a section on about, the podcast link, and speaking. So this is a mini site. It is not the blog. And that's kind of unique, because if I look here, /about is part of this main site. So there's Hanselman main. Hanselman/speaking is not its own site. It's just a subdirectory under hanselman.com. But once we hit /blog, that is its own app. All right. And I think we may have lost Mark.
Oop, here in just a sec.
And
you're back.
Yeah.
All right. So here's Mark's blog. What are we looking at here, Mark?
Right. So this is my kind of homepage. Really, what I was trying to accomplish here is DOS Blog was is very good at themes. You've been able to kind of choose what flavor you want to have. So essentially, what I wanted to do was build a system that allowed me to I kind of like to change my blog theme every 2 years. I'm just weird like that. But essentially what I wanted to do here is be able to make it really accessible and easy. So this is my homepage. This actually isn't the source or the root of the blog. Okay. You can actually go now to the kind of blog, and that really is where DOS Blog starts. So this is the point here where DOS Blog starts now. And at this point,
is that DOS blog or is that a tiny mini site?
that's just a tiny site. That's not doing
That's
anything.
a real common pattern. So he and I share that pattern.
Yeah. So now we're kind of in DOS blog proper. And I themed my front page to kind of have this kind of card looking scenario here. But if you kind of click into each individual page, I kind of have a different theme here. This is like slightly different stuff to what was available for DOS blog. But essentially I can have a theme for my front page, a theme for my individual blog posts, and then kind of all the other things that DOS blog had which is a set of categories for each of your posts, and then an archive kind of listing everything by month and year. And then obviously the RSS feed, which we made available. All these kind of things were all available. If you kind of look, if you can hit F12 for a second, and let's kind of look at that head. If in the elements, hit elements, I think. And then there's a ton of stuff in that head kind of, that kind of DOS blog was kind of doing and providing for us here. So we had to kind of pull this data in. There's information about your site, and underlying all this kind of data are basically 3 or 4 config files is the way DOS blog does it. And so I just wanted to continue that theme. So when we look at the project itself, you have a bunch of configs that can, so I'm taking a little bit of information now from .NET Core and the way your kind of UI works in .NET Core, and using configuration files for environments and stuff like that.
Yeah, I found this to be really, really useful and kind of innovative because, and I wrote a blog post about it actually today. I don't know if you saw, Mark, that I appreciated what you did here, which is if there's a hosting environment, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll just use dot. And then you've got your standard config files, but these are all kind of non-standard config files. These are DOS blog specific files. And we can name an environment whatever we want. We could have pest or cloud. I could make, site.cloud.config if it made me happy. DOS blog doesn't care.
I'll share a link to that post in the comments.
That is actually right here as well. It's actually on the home page right now, and I want to point out both on my blog the what they call kebab casing, and Mark has that as well on his. If we pick one of his, looks like a shish kebab.
And just like the old DOS blog, you can go with a plus sign if you want to. There's some variations on this.
Right. You got pluses or hyphens or whatever. So that's actually brings up a good point. If we go out here and we search for something, search for Hanselman, Mark Downie, if we find a blog post. So here we see that a search engine has already brought in and noticed that I've changed the URL style. Okay. Here's another one. And if we try to find an older thing, here we go. Let's look at this URL here.
So that's the web form style
one, right?
Yeah.
If we grab that, I'm going to actually bring it in here and copy paste it and do the F12 thing just to make sure it's clear what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to clear that. There we go.
Okay, so redirected. Yeah.
The original one is now a permanent redirect, and eventually the search engines will notice that. And that's just super, super, super important to be able to do that, because both of us have, 15, 20 years of content, and you can't just say, please update your links. That would be
right. Okay, so you talked about the URL structure and why it's important. Can you show us how you did that? Like, how do you handle those redirects?
So I did a blog post about that a couple days ago. Oh, don't ever break a URL if you help it. And it was kind of funny because I did a blog post back in 2017 called URLs or UI, and it had an ASPX extension in it. And the people at Hacker News were rather mean about it. They were like, who is this preachy person who is going and telling us about his UI, how important URLs are when you have this thing here, and it's not really awesome because it, ASP.NET has supported extensionless URLs for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. So what Mark has done here is we've got kind of two layers. There's and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, because I don't want to talk for you, but there's the startup.cs redirections, which are the standard formats we can use here.
Yep.
And then outside, before you ever get into the blog, I can use an XML file to do redirection optionally.
Yeah, exactly. So we have the IIS kind of rerouting kind of system that you can plug into Dustblog and say essentially this would be equivalent to what you would do previously with IIS, except you can kind of plug it into as part of the middleware of .NET Core, right? And so now if you have other URLs that were really important to you that didn't quite fit the 95% of the use cases that I assumed people converting might want to use, you can go ahead and add your own.
Yeah. So there's an incredibly old format that is probably, I think we only had this for 2 or 3 years. You may have actually, did your blog have these in 2005?
No.
Yeah, so it was permalink.aspx $GUID equals, and then literally we were running around with a GUID. It was just a nightmare. but here's what's interesting. So if I'll go look at the code that Mark wrote, but he's got a post controller that takes a GUID. So I can map the funky old format to the new one. And the way I watch this, and this is really exciting, is I've got it in Azure. I can go and see failed requests, and don't be sad, like there are failed requests all the time in the world. It's not necessarily a failure of your blog. So I go here into Application Insights, and I say, okay, look, there's a 404. Is anything here interesting? Now, here you go. That might be a redirect I could fix, right? Maybe someone's having trouble with the archives there. I've fixed most of our issues. There's a couple of missing images. I'm not seeing any blog posts that I can fix, but for a while I was seeing people coming in with this old style. Mm-hmm. I talked to Mark and he said, oh, hey, I've got this GUID one. And if we go and look at that in the code here, I hit Control T and type in post controller. And here we've got post with a GUID, and he's got get blog post by GUID. And then we have a little conversation in the chat there. So what's nice about this is that Mark doesn't care about these because he doesn't have those out in Google, but I do. And Dustblog is configurable enough that I can put these redirects that I want in my own file here. And this is interesting, and this might be important to point out for the folks that are watching. This is an IIS style of redirects, but there is no IIS involved. This is super important to point out. IIS made this format many, many years ago. This is a thing that is read in by some middleware. I think we added here.
So that's the rewrite middleware, and then that handles support for a few different formats. There's IIS rewrite, and then there's some others.
Yeah, I guess we could do that, couldn't we? Like, yeah, if you prefer Apache for your middleware rewriting needs, you can do that.
Nice. Okay. So you show, how do you find out? You showed there that you've got the logging. Do you also, I saw as you were showing code, there's also like health checks and things like that. How important were health checks and testing and things like that as you were doing this update?
Well, so this one was I was finding out that I put in a ping application. I don't know if you use Pingdom, Mark, or anything like that. Do you have any kind of like uptime checkers? No. So I basically went to a third-party site and said, hey, ping my website every few minutes.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out it was pinging it every 5 seconds, and it was doing a get and loading the homepage, which is like, 500K or something, or a meg. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to pay the 30 gigs a month or whatever to have you tell me that I'm okay. So a health check is an ASP.NET ism where you go, like that, and it just returns healthy or unhealthy, or if it comes back with nothing, then you have an issue. And health checks are great because you can go and look at other aspects of what's wrong with the blog. And then Mark made a thing called the site repairer.
Nice.
It's basically like goes through and looks for directories that need to exist. All the little things that you might forget that would cause a DOS blog user to be unhappy. So the site repairer runs on startup and makes sure that these different directories exist and that they're ready to go. And then the health, I haven't yet done it, but the health map could integrate into that and basically look for a bunch of files and ensure that they are in fact there and healthy.
So that's, I guess, a good time to point out that there's no backing database. It's all file based, right?
Yeah, I think this is a thing that makes DOS blog unique and special. Other people feel that this is nightmare fuel. What do you think, Mark?
It was actually,
why not both?
This was the reason why I chose DOS blog actually over other alternatives. To be honest, I felt that the closest thing to be as close to my writing as possible, to not have an opportunity to lose stuff again. I needed it in a format that didn't care about who produced it or who was going to subsequently consume it. So a text file is the very definition of that thing, right? So for me, it was, I'd kind of been hurt so badly that I was never going to go down a road of, you put this in a proprietary format for me, and I have to figure out how to pull that data out from whatever system you've created. So for me, XML and just the text-based options were it for me.
Yeah, having that sense of it's just a text file was, at the time, pre-Markdown. Keep in mind, Markdown hasn't been invented at this point. Gave us a sense of comfort because nobody wants to have some binary SQLite file that their files are trapped in, and it's this blob. So I have zip files that are backups of my blog, and that makes me comfortable. And the goal for this migration was, that I would take my existing blog, which was hosted on bare metal, and I would just copy the content folder over to Mark's version, and it would just work. Yeah. And for the most part, it did, like 80%, right? Which actually brings us to, I think, discussing the project structure and how you moved it to .NET Core and what was hard and what wasn't.
Yeah, so fundamentally, the New Intelligence DOS blog runtime is really just a copy of what was started when Scott and Clemens and I assume Omar started this whole project. That is to suggest these kind of raw types. Some of these are collections, right? Some of these kind of go back so many years to iterations of objects and types that we think about when we think about .NET 2.0 or .NET 1.1. So I pretty much left that as is. Part of my, I guess, personal philosophy is that I hate reinventing things that are working very, very well. And especially if it's something I trust, I wanted to kind of keep that trust as best I can. However, there are certain things that we felt, hey, these have been reinvented for us, and we really don't have to rely on something as that would lock us into the Windows ecosystem. So things like there was a specific version of how we handle time zones and time that was part of this project, that we took that out and replaced it with Noda time. I'm not sure if I did it in an idiomatic fashion, but I did something I essentially said that's replaceable by something that is solid that the community relies on. So this whole kind of project, really, you'll see object collection and all variations of that going through all this thing.
Yeah.
So between that, though, because I didn't want to necessarily deal with that at the layer that is the UI layer, which is going to be brand new. There is kind of like a middle section we refer to as the manager section. And the manager section essentially says, I will deal with the old and transform it into new, which the UI side will take on. And so that allowed me to kind of start thinking about dependency injection, which is kind of more in line with modern themes. And allowed me to kind of disregard ASP.NET Web Forms, which was kind of mostly dealing with static objects that kind of existed everywhere in essence. Now I can kind of essentially above the manager line, you are as contemporary and as new as possible. Below, we rely on the old because it works and because we don't have to change it.
And that's almost like a view, like a document view model, right? Because there's the core runtime idea of what an entry looks like, which may or may not have everything that needs to be displayed, and then there's the entry view that the front end needs to look like. And it's worth pointing out that this was a web forms application. So that's original equipment. These are ports and a lot of new code from Mark that are all .NET standard. How did we move a web forms application forward? DOS Blog, as old as it was actually pretty well factored because it fed object collections into web forms. So if I go and look at a theme, which was, I think, at the time, one of DOS Blog's most innovative things. Let's look at the blog for a layout. So here's a layout. You've got your nav bar and different stuff like this, okay? Mm-hmm. What I think, to Mark's credit, what he did is he took what used to be web forms controls and turned them into tag helpers.
Oh, nice.
So for every web forms control that existed, there is a tag helper parallel. So literally all I did was take my themes. Here's one of my themes that was done by a designer that I hired named Jin Yang. And Jin Yang was actually one of the original designers at Stack Overflow. And I used to do things like this. This is old DOS Blog code using a custom macro that we did. So I don't know, Mark, when you had the epiphany, but you figured out that I should write tag helpers for these.
Yeah. There was a bunch of community kind of effort around talking about tag helpers at the time. And I was trying to figure out what things would make it easy for others. If I knew I could figure it out, but what would make it really compelling and easy for people to make a theme, right? And so we needed something that somebody could create. We kind of settled on Razor as being the viewing kind of mechanism because it just made sense. It was there, it was obvious. And then these lightweight tag helpers, just being able to drop them into a particular context would really be helpful. So right now, Scott's showing off the like a blog item summary. So this would be essentially what I showed as a single card on my summary page, and I can define that right here. So I'm defining things like the list of categories. So I may have a list. I could, with this particular, with the post categories list box, I could actually say I want it to be comma separated or semicolon separated or whatever I wanted. I could pass in a bit of data that essentially exists as a separator. And then we have post title. You can pass in things like styles to them, and it will look at your entry and say, oh, I see the title, and I can essentially pass a style. So all the way I was just kind of thinking about the ways in which people want to interact with a usable component of what kind of information you might want to pass to it.
The other thing that was really significant was there's an opinionated style here, Mark. I mean, you kept with Clemen's idea of a layout has a certain number of required things, like you need a blog item and you need a layout, and that's basically it. But if you want to override the behavior of something, you want to make something look different, then you just add them. So for example, you see that this theme has 5 Razor pages. My theme has like 15 or 20, right? So it does that by falling back, right? It uses the ASP.NET MVC style of shared views. So if you don't override a view, you get a free one. And if you want a different view, you just make one, and then it'll just pick up yours.
Yeah, ultimately, we wanted to, essentially, the list, the order in which it looks for an item is defined right at the start during your startup. And we can say, okay, we've got another location where you can potentially find a Razor page, and go here first. So essentially, you get to override anything. So essentially everything is overridable in the entire site.
Yep, exactly.
That's such a nice pattern. The whole kind of like there's something that's going to work by default, but you can override it. I know that's something like, for instance, the authentication views in ASP.NET Core have done recently, and that kind of like it'll work out of the box, or you can drop in and override more things if you want.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of hacks here that I'm having trouble with that maybe Damien, who is in the chat, someone said that they can trust .NET to run for a decade.
Yeah, I thought this was
Try
really
2.
Cool. Well, this is a huge deal, and I think this is a big point and a part of why like enterprises and stuff use .NET is it's easy to go out on Medium or Dev2 and grab the latest JavaScript framework and spin up your blog, but it's hard to evolve technology over decades and keep it running and know it's going to work, and that is a really important value for .NET in general. So
and actually, speaking of like keeping it up to date and stuff, one of the things that Damien Edwards helped us with is if you go to my blog and you go all the way down at the bottom, you can see the version of .NET, the commit that I built from, and the build itself. So if I can go and click on those, and I can see the actual code in GitHub that caused that build to occur. Now I'm logged in at work right now, but what I'll do is I'll go down here and I'll say right-click, open as personal, because I have I have my work and my personal. So right-click, open as personal.
I need to use that. I'm constantly jumping between these.
There's the build in the pipeline as well. Now, Damien will complain that I'm on .NET 3.1.8 and not 0.9, but this one is. I need to go and figure out why isn't that weird? Because remember I have multiple pages, right? There's the blog, the podcast, and the homepage. And for some reason, the new SDK is picking up this runtime here, but I'm off by .1 on my on my home. But again, when the builds happen, I pick these up because if we go back to our pipeline this is using Azure pipelines, although you could certainly use GitHub Actions if it makes you happy. We're pulling in the latest .NET SDK right there. You're saying update, Damien, but you're not on this episode, so you don't get to
Damien, join right in.
Join right in and come and tell me how to get this updated.
We'll do it live.
Let's do it now.
So have you tested you've got .NET 3.1.8, 3.1.9. Have you tested with .NET 5?
I've done some.
I have not. And sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I've done some preliminary testing. Nothing solid. I should. We should. We absolutely should. I was just with Scott moving. I was like, I don't want any changes to the surface of the water right now. But
I would say though that Mark and I had conversations about what our goal was, and we are kind of LTS people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we have the energy, Mark, to be updating to the latest thing all the time. I feel comforted that I'm on an LTS build and that I can easily get it out. Hey, it's Damien Edwards.
Look what happened there.
Do you want to debug this, Damo?
My ears were burning.
So here's the deal. The blog is on 3.1.8.
That's one extra version from where it was a couple days ago, if I recall.
I know, because you told me to.
Yeah.
And the homepage is on 3.1.9.
Right.
Okay. And they both build in DevOps.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two things. There's the website. I mean, this is all of my stuff. But here's the website. Okay, this is the main one, okay? And here's the pipeline for the main one.
This is the one that is up to date.
Right. And this one is not using the YAML style of things.
But you have the version hard-coded in this one for some reason. Why is
because
that?
I don't know how to float versions in this one.
See the little I? If you hover over the little I there, it tells you how to do it.
So you go .x.
Just .x. So just remove the .403 and put .x.
Okay. Save and queue.
So you've got a pipeline using the original sort of wizard style, and then you've got a newer one that's the YAML style. Is
Exactly.
that right?
So here we are. So we're going to build. This is the home page of Hanselman.com
Yep.
in production, because that's how we do things.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
And these are self-contained deployments, which is why we have to fix this, right? Because if you're running a framework-dependent deployment, you will get patched as soon as the underlying machine install effectively.
So at the time that we started this process, I felt more comfortable with self-contained. I felt like it gave me a sense of control, and I felt like I could get the latest version on Azure quicker than Azure could.
Yep, absolutely.
I understand that may change in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So while it's doing this, and to explain, so there's different deployment models. You can do a self-contained, which brings its own .NET framework with or .NET Core with it, and then there's the framework dependent, which is what's the latest on the machine, where you depend on machine patching and all that.
That's right. And in this case, when we say framework, obviously, unfortunately, in our ecosystem, we have a bunch of words that are incredibly overloaded. But when we say framework in this case, there's actually two. So because this is an ASP.NET Core app, at the bottom of the pyramid, there's the .NET Core shared framework. And then on top of that, there's the ASP.NET Core shared framework. And then sitting on top of that would just be your application files, your NuGet packages, whatever assemblies that you reference, et cetera, et cetera. In a self-contained application, the underlying frameworks that you refer to with a framework reference, which is often implied, you don't see it in your project file, it's just there as a result of whatever SDK you target. Those assemblies get copied into your output folder as well, plus the native code that actually bootstraps .NET Core itself, and that's why it's a self-contained app. In .NET 5, we now have improved support for not only self-contained apps, but single exe or single executable apps, along with application linking or trimming, depending on what parlance you kind of prefer. And so not only can you do a self-contained that is a single executable, one file for all the dynamic stuff, your static files still remain separate for a web application, but then you can trim it. You can run it through the linker, which is part of the SDK. And this technology is still in preview, but you can kind of turn up the linker knob to say, yeah, I really want to link out as much code as possible. Not only will it trim assemblies that it figures out you don't use, it'll go into the IL and literally rip out methods and properties and things that you don't use as well. Now, that can cause problems, which is why it's in preview. And sometimes you have to give it a little bit of extra information because of the dynamic nature of .NET. But we've seen some customers already using this to great effect to very quickly either half the size of their self-contained applications, whether they're Windows desktop apps using WinForms and WPF or ASP.NET Core apps like this, or even further than half if they're able to tweak it down and their code is factored in such a way that the static analyzer and the linker can figure out what is safe and what isn't to remove. So
I saw James Newton King just over the past weekend had something where he was talking about dialing down on his gRPC and putting those hints in and getting some nice like you're saying, like just dialing that down even further, which is really cool.
Right. So we did a bunch of work, admittedly late, in .NET 5 to utilize some new features which allow you to annotate types with attributes, especially for framework authors, so that they can instruct the linker about how the specific type information is used, within the body of a method or within a type itself. So that even if when looking at that from the outside as a tool, you might say, oh, well, this code isn't used. The type that's passed in is never referred to. That code might be doing something dynamic via reflection or code generation or whatever it might be at runtime. And so you can annotate that and say, no, linker, like just hands off. Like this is actually needed. You may not be able to determine that, but I actually need this. So we went and annotated a whole bunch of ASP.NET Core so that you can more aggressively trim ASP.NET Core itself. And then where there's been a blog post about this, and there'll be further documentation to help library authors do similar things, so that more frameworks are just safe by default to turn on the more aggressive linking behavior. Go, Scott.
Question. So Mark and I made the YAML version for the blog and floated the SDK version. And publish the build artifact,
Mm-hmm.
and we get as a self-contained, and we get 318.
8. That's interesting. Are they both on Linux or Windows, or are they different?
So mine is on Linux.
Okay.
Mark's is on Windows.
And you get the same result or different results?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know what version you're running on, Mark?
I'm not sure. Give me a moment.
I'm not sure if he's lit up
Right.
the footer as I did.
So the other thing to check would be the log for your build, specifically that task, the use.NET task, should emit some log messages about how it acquires the SDK, and it should tell you which version it found based on the wildcard that you set, and we should cross-reference that version with whatever the latest version is.
Do you want to share your screen and look at your build? Yeah, I built on Thursday, which was a week after 319 came out. But
Okay.
this build did not pick up 319. So
if we look at what's the SDK version, because we need to use the decoder ring to figure out which SDK version came with 319.
So I'm here.
Yep.
And I do job, and we look at the 403, which is what it should be.
That's what it is. Yeah. So 403 SDK is the release that came with the 319
Yes.
update. And you can tell that, for folks who don't know, you can tell that by going to dot.net, clicking on download, and then going to all downloads, and then you'll get a table where you.
Oh, that's interesting. Look at this.
Whoa! What is that?
Is that a coincidence?
That's a new line. Why is it emitting? That's interesting. That might just be a bug in our very simplistic logic to capture the build info.
I think the build info file was created. I think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
That
That
build
file doesn't
info
contain
is
the
not
runtime.
intended to show the version of .NET which is picked up from the environment.
That's correct.
That build info is created here. And that's just the build ID. So that's a coincidence
Okay.
that the build ID is.
Happens to be a similar looking number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mark,
just
what have you
remind me,
found?
which one of your sites, you said your homepage, your main site is on the latest version or isn't?
Yes, it is.
It is. And it's the one that's using the older style DevOps Windows
Yes.
hosted pipeline. But the newer one, which is on the Linux YAML pipeline, is the one that isn't.
And the old style one builds on Windows.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's built on Windows, deployed onto Linux.
Right.
This is running on Linux, and it's on 319. And when you texted me yesterday and said update, it updated in minutes.
Okay.
The blog is on 318, but was built with the latest SDK.
And if we go back to the only thing I would check, because I've got a couple of my own sites obviously running on similar things, and I haven't seen this problem, and I'm using the YAML and I'm building on Linux and deploying to Linux as well.
Wow.
It would be like the version of the tasks and things. But again, like everything here is fine. It's use.NET at 2.
Yep.
You're using the right wildcard. Did you look at the log? You did look at the log, and it said it was downloading 403?
Yep, it did.
So the only other thing then would be it's weird, but to check your.
It said right here.
Okay, so just wait a second. Let's make sure we read the rest of it.
And it's on Ubuntu 18, which isn't awesome.
But then it says it's successfully installed. So then the other thing would be that SDK will then determine what version to use based on your project file, which I'm assuming the only information in there you have is the TFM. Like I'm assuming you're not overriding any of the other properties.
Good point. So that is here.
Just as FYI, my Windows and Linux both seem to be saying 31403 as well.
Okay.
3.1 what?
403 for the SDK.
Okay, so you're on the same.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep, and that's the
Yep.
up there. So yeah, we're not doing anything wrong.
Let's have a look. I'm just scanning the other properties. Oh, okay.
Well, I have to go have lunch. But the result of all of this was we ran this on staging for some months, didn't we, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
And I started to feel that my existing website was creaky. And I called Mark in a panic last week, and I said, I don't think it's going to last the weekend. And he was very, very kind, and we spent, I don't know what we spent, about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And perf is better. We didn't break any SEO. Get all the benefits of Azure, which is really nice. Backups and diagnostics. I made this cool dashboard. The perf is just ridiculous. Like, it's not even touching 2%, 3%. I do have a long page load time, and it's basically all JavaScript. Oh, Nils is asking if there's a global JSON. Good answer. Good question. Go see. That might be it right there.
The agent itself in DevOps obviously has pre-installed SDKs, and that's why there was a message saying it didn't find 403 in the cache, which means the agent image hasn't been updated to 403 yet. You have a task that acquires 403, so that's the one that it puts in the effectively on the path for your build. But if you have a global JSON, it'll evaluate that.
Yep. No global JSON.
Okay. So not sure. We'd have to do some more digging.
Well, we can poke around a little later, but it's been great. It stays up. Haven't had any issues at all. I think we might have some stuff around log files taking up some space. We make quite a bit of log files, but I'm learning about the new logging system that Dustblog Core has. But yeah, I would say in the 3 weeks that it has been up, it has worked out very, very nicely, and it sits behind an Azure front door. So at the very, very beginning of this conversation, for those who were there, we pointed out that the main page is different from the /blog. And that is because Azure Front Door routes.
Yeah, so you pointed out it's actually like 3 different mini sites, and they're all kind of wired to, or 2 different.
Yep, exactly.
So
I'll
that's
say
how it's
anecdotally, the latency on the site seems to be much lower now. Like I opened the dev tools yesterday, I turned off the cache, and I hit Control F5 a bunch of times, and it was just instant every single time.
All the images also come off. I did a little silly thing that Mark has teased me about gently, which is I'm still working on, and it's not my greatest hour. Where is that? Where did we do that? Was it the blog page? It was that raw thing, remember? Oh, this.
Oh, HTML raw.
So this was just an experiment, but it ended up going into production where I swap out all calls to my images for an Azure CDN.
Right.
And that has really improved latency everywhere, and it required nothing, and I can turn it off in one line. Now, it's not awesome to be doing a search and replace or a string replace on every blog post on every hit.
Right.
So that's an artifact of the fact that Dustblog has these URLs embedded with absolute URLs and not relative ones, which is not awesome.
Are you doing any caching out of interest?
Do we do any caching? Do we have any cache?
And I mean, I don't mean setting cache headers. I'm assuming you're doing that. I mean,
no, I'm looking around. I think we had talked about adding.
I think there is in the.
Oh, we do caching here. We do caching in one space.
Okay, so that's a fragment cache. Okay.
No, I think there is actually. Can you go to the home controller?
Home controller?
Yeah, and check check the constructor of the home controller. See if there's a memory cache object there.
Ah, here you go. So you're caching the database.
The front page, essentially, yeah.
Okay, so I saw 2 caches then. We've got some code-based caching here for the data that you retrieve from your XML files, essentially. And then you've got a fragment cache using the cache tag helper, which didn't even have an expiry by the looks of it. Like, it literally would just cache forever while the app is running, because it was just vary by the various route values for the archive page. That's what I saw when you showed it. Right.
Yeah, because if we don't really, the thought was that we don't really go back in time and update like April of 2007. So it'll get, when a thing restarts, it'll get updated.
Got it.
Cool.
So there's front page caching, and that's about it. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for easy sprinkle around fragment caching opportunities.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Things like archives, or
and I
like
know that the engine itself does some pretty aggressive caching, because the engine is a singleton. So the thing that the deserialized object graph of all of the blog posts is cached, but the running of the Razor pages happens multiple times.
Right.
But if you go and look at the actual blog itself, my blog is quite large because it's like 6,000 whatevers. So where's memory? So, I'm using probably a gig of RAM, maybe a gig and a half. So we're holding entries, our object in memory as a giant object graph.
Got it.
When arguably we should be storing HTML or something like that.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's fast. It's fast. We're very happy with it.
Very cool.
Anything I missed, Mark?
No, I think that's it.
That's a lot there. Well, so as you mentioned before, Scott, like this is something that's evolving over time, and you touched on a lot of different areas. And maybe even later, if you test out like .NET 5 migration, or if you want to dig, people that are watching and chat, let us know if there's some specific areas you'd like to hear more about.
Yeah,
that'd be fun to keep digging into this. So
yeah, and people have been kind enough to. I made a GitHub. Yeah, see, this is another thing that's happening. See this here? This is an Azure CDN thing. This person's saying this image can't be opened directly, right? And there it is. So it's like, what do you do?
I mean, if it's a CDN, it may have been transient. I mean, those things happen.
Yeah, it just kind of bums me out.
CDN is you'll often, because that's not plugged into your App Insights monitoring or anything, right? So you won't see that as a 404.
Yeah.
It'll just be like somewhere on the edge, someone didn't get an image, and there's nothing, you don't know about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good stuff. This was wonderful. Nice to have Mark on for the first time. Have Scott and surprise Damien show up. So wild Damien appears. So this is awesome. So keep watching. We've got shows now every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've also got .NET Conf coming up soon. So a lot of good stuff. And I guess that's we'll wrap up there.
Yeah. And I think Mark has been on before or will be on. There's dump file analysis with Mads Christensen with Visual Studio Office Hours. So you should go to .NET Live TV and check that out as well. And I just want to thank Mark both. I've done it privately, but I want to do it publicly for all of his hard work to make DOS Blog live on into 2020. Being able to run this thing in the cloud has been a dream, and it's been a huge amount of anxiety of just wondering, when is my blog going to go down, and then we're going to have to move it. And being able to move it without it actually dying in its previous location has just lifted a weight off of me. So thank you, Mark, for your hard work and for your community.
It's been cool. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there then. So thanks, everybody.